Good morning, guys. Ozzy and Miss Polar Bear here today. So, this morning we'll be talking about poetry as we are introducing the new month of April. Alright, so here we go. National Poetry Month. Woohoo! So, a kind of a summarizing glance of what we're doing is we will be reading, writing, and analyzing poetry. We're going to be looking at different poets. I think that you guys will be familiar with the list that I composed. And we're also going to be looking at some of the more popular styles of poetry. So, kind of at a glance, as far as styles, we'll be looking at haikus, limericks, which are kind of wonky, wacky, kind of fun little poetry styles, odes, acrostic poetry, free verse, which is one of my favorite kinds of poetry styles, and slam poetry, which I think you guys will greatly enjoy. So we're going to be also looking at specific writers, and some on the list are Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Frost, Shel Silverstein, and A.A. Milne. So I think you guys know most of those lovely poets. A.A. Milne, although his name might not be familiar to you, he actually wrote Winnie the Pooh. So, Poetry Speaks. To get the full effect of poetry, we're going to aim our study of poems to probably every other day, or at least we're going to try to. Because if we don't do it as frequently as that, we won't be doing it as justice. So, poetry, firsthand, it kind of looks like collecting thoughts, feelings, and emotions about ourselves, other people, and the world around us. And this kind of keeps the language of poetry alive. So, writing poetry is a way of seeing the world, and it is very particular. So, we kind of have to use a very specific lens when studying poetry because we're discovering the small things in life. And they're usually the small things that go unnoticed. So we will start by making observations about the world around us and images. And that is the point. The point of that is to kind of like get the flow of writing, the flow of the style, and the flavor of poetry. And poetry is a very different animal. It's a very different breed of writing. So it's very different from the writing that we've been used to doing in class. And we can throw logic out the window, and we can let our imaginations soar. That's how different poetry is. Our first poet of study is Robert Frost. So, he was known as being a poet first most, but he also kind of dabbled in the playwriting world, but he wasn't as famous for that. He was known, however, for his realistic depictions of rural life. So rural life is like countryside living, like farmland living. And he wrote about New England specifically. So early years. Well, he wasn't from around here first. He was actually born in California over by the West Coast. But at a young age, his family moved him to Lawrence, Mass. So living in the city. So he didn't like living in the city as much. It didn't let his poetry and writing juices flow, so to speak. For example, he worked various jobs, including teaching, delivering newspapers, and working in a lamp factory. And he didn't like this so much because it kept him from writing. It kept him from his true calling in life. Rural life, that countryside living. So he moved to Derry, New Hampshire, to work on a farm for 9 years. And although he spent that much time working on the farm was very unsuccessful. But he did get a lot of poetry writing done. He would wake up super early in the morning, do all the farm work, and by late afternoon, night, he got to write poetry. And this is actually the farm that he lived on. It actually got turned into a museum about Robert Frost. And when the farm turned to bad, he became an English teacher in a nearby university. So some notable works. So he was known for writing about the actions of ordinary men. He didn't write about famous people. He didn't write about these grand gestures that people do. He just wrote about the straight facts about random people. And that's why people liked his writing, because people could connect to him easily. So he was also considered to be a very serious and honest writer. He wrote straight to the point, like I said before, and he was also very criticized for that, as well as being too traditional, meaning he kind of just like stuck to his guns, he stuck to his beliefs, and wouldn't like step outside of the poetry box to write different. He kind of did his own thing. And a fact that I like about him is he didn't focus on the form of poetry. His subjects, his focus was the content, which is what he was writing about. Like, he didn't really care about style, he just wanted to write to the point. So this is lovely New Hampshire right here. So this is an example of the scenery that he would write about. He loved writing about fall time in New England because of the beautiful colors seen in this photograph. Very natural and very countryside looking. Very picturesque. So he received some very like cool honors in life. So he got the Congressional Gold Medal from President John F. Kennedy for his poetry writing. He also received a similar award called the Edward McDowell Medal for his poetry as well. He has several schools named after him. We have one right here in Lawrence, Robert Frost Middle School. There's also a Robert Frost School in Virginia as well. There's museums, and he also read a poem at the President JFK's inauguration. So, unfortunately, he had a very untimely death. He did die of complications of a surgery and was buried in Bennington, Vermont. So there were a handful of places that he could have been buried because he was very well traveled. He spent some time in England, Florida, Virginia. He went back to the West Coast a little bit. But his home, his true like home of the heart, was New England. And he lived in Vermont for a little bit, so that's where they decided to bury him. And they buried him with his wife. So you note here that his wife died a little earlier than he did. So, and on their tombstones, they each have quotes. So Robert's quote is, "I had a lover's quarrel with the world," which I believe, this is how I'm going to interpret it. So quarrel is kind of like a bickering. It's kind of like a fight, but not a serious fight. Kind of like a nonsense fight. And a lover's quarrel, so a lover's nonsense fight, meaning that it was kind of like a friendly fight. Like it's one of those fights you have with friends that don't last very long. You guys can like hug it out in the end. With the world. I think that is a notice of his well-traveledness. Ozzy, wake up! Ozzy! Oh, you must be having a bad dream. All right. So, and you know, she also has a quote: "Together, wing to wing, and oar to oar." Well, I think this is an ode to Robert Lee Frost. Together, wing to wing, meaning by plane, and oar to oar. So she traveled a lot with him. And I think this is saying that, hey, you know what, Robert, we'll be together whether we go by plane or by boat. The world cannot separate us. All right, so that's all about Robert Frost. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to learning more poetry with you guys.